Wind drifts off Chichagof harbour in tatters of fog, the canvas snapping like musketry. It is May 30th, 1943, Attu Island, and Mess Sergeant Joe Red Hanlon kneels by an M1937 field range, cupping the blue cone of flame against the gale. The burner growls, bacon hits steel and spits, batter beads into circles that tremble as the tent bows in the wind. Across the sodden tundra, a file of Japanese prisoners shuffles toward the flap under the eye of military police. Private Tadao Nakamura, 303rd Independent Infantry Battalion, watches the ladle shine and the steam rise, surprised that the hand beckoning him forward is gloved, not clenched around a rifle butt. "Step forward," the MP says, not unkindly, and the order startles him more than a shout would have. Hanlon has already counted portions twice, 12 ounces of batter per man, a ladle of maple-flavoured syrup warmed on the stove's back plate so it will pour in the cold, 2 rashers of bacon, coffee measured by the tablespoon to a pot big enough to drown a helmet. Doctrine and law ride this ladle. Under the 1929 Geneva Convention, the ration must match what the base camp gets, and in the American system the law is backed by capacity. Ruiz, his wiry assistant, braces a knee to the griddle table as another gust rattles the poles. "Flip!" Hanlon calls, and 3 cakes go up at once, a field kitchen ballet nobody rehearsed and everyone knows. Nakamura reaches the line. The M1 Garand slung at the MP's shoulder looks impossibly modern to him. Gas-operated 8-round N-block clip, a weapon that fires as quickly as a thought. So different from the bolt-action rhythm of the Type 99 Arisaka, he surrendered without quite remembering he had let go. The mess kit is dented but clean, sluiced in near-boiling wash water, lid clacking like cymbals. Bacon fat snaps at his wrist. The syrup moves slow in the cold until Ruiz rests the can on warm steel and coaxes it into a ribbon. He was taught to expect brutality. Instead, he receives sweetness. Steam lifts into the salt air. The flap breathes. Somewhere outside, a BAR clacks as its bipod is folded and stowed. Hanlon counts heads and fuel at once, thinking in BTUs the way an artilleryman thinks in miles. This breakfast would have been ordinary in Kansas. Here it is logistics under fire, ships, rails, depots, stoves, doctrine, a democracy functioning like a machine. Nakamura tastes and flinches, not from pain but from sugar, a civilian flavour blooming in a battlefield mouth. He bows without meaning to. The wind worries the ropes. Hanlon tilts a coffee pot and marks a crate. 2 tins down, 3 to go. Outside, sleet needles sideways across the tundra in bright grey sheets. Inside, the line moves with the patient rhythm of a factory that refuses to admit it has been built in a gale. Ruiz taps the syrup can, checks the warmth, nods, and steps aside for the next plate. Another astonished face. The storm does not break. Something else does. The certainty of an enemy private who has just learned that his captors can feed him while the guns are still warm. Dawn hardens into pewter and the ropes sing under strain, guy lines humming like harp strings in the wind. Hanlon and Private First Class Della Shorty Ruiz run the field kitchen ballet they learned from manuals and muscle memory, each movement stealing a little warmth back from the weather. The M1937 range gulps fuel. The M1941 tent stove glows dull red heating wash water. Lids clatter to vent steam without surrendering heat. The trick is cadence. Under shelter, a griddle cake wants 3 minutes. In this gale, it wants 5, unless you bank sandbags to break the gusts and let the steel hold its temper. Ruiz keeps the batter thin enough to set, thick enough to survive the carry to the plate, and warms the syrup so it will pour instead of crawl. "Flip," Hanlon calls, and 3 cakes go up. He is counting calories and minutes at once, near 1,200 calories per plate for men pulled back from the line and for prisoners barely standing. He inventories aloud because it steadies his crew. Flour sacks stamped quartermaster numbers, 10-pound tins of maple-flavoured syrup, bacon slabs salted against the world, coffee by the tablespoon per man per pot. An MP lieutenant steps in, wind-walking. Same chow, Sergeant. Same measure, no theatre, just the law. A medic follows, goggles fogged, remarking that hot liquids bring back focus and sugar snaps men from grey to colour. Humane treatment typically yields better vitals before anyone asks a question. On the perimeter, the weapons rest easy. M1 Garans in a rack, their N-block clips like little steel pillows. A BAR lying across a crate. Belts of 30-06 in linked loops like metal ivy. K rations wait in case the line falters. Meat unit, biscuit, candy bar, war in a box. But Hanlon is determined to serve the real thing as long as fuel holds. The fuel itself has a temper, a smell like hot pennies and kerosene. When the raw thins, he knows he has an hour in the can if the wind doesn't freshen. Ruiz slaps her gloves against her thighs to bring feeling back and curses the batter that skins over between bowl and grill. Someone answers with a joke older than the war. The laugh makes the tent feel briefly American in the way diners are American. Outside, the Aleutians make their own weather. Inside, the kitchen makes its own country. The line is not just hungry men. It is proof that policy can be a shelter if you build it stout and feed it heat. When the lieutenant steps into sleet again, he leaves the sentence that holds the room together. Same chow, same measure. Hanlon grunts without looking up and sets another run of cakes to dancing. Night falls in Pearl Harbor with the hush of ceiling fans and pencils. Lieutenant Evelyn Hart straightens onion skin sheets under a green lamp and draws a ruler across a convoy track, the graphite line scything south of Kyushu. Her wall is a nervous system of strings and pins, sinkings, dates, cargo guesses. She maps appetite. Every ship that fails to arrive means rice that never leaves the dock, ammunition that never becomes noise. She would have to explain it to men who hear only explosions, so she writes it as mathematics. Merchant tonnage curves dip through late 42 and steepen into 1943. Patrol reports mention premature detonations until the fixes, then a new tempo as the torpedoes behave and captains learn the seas. A graph can be cold. This one is verdict. The impossible number sits in her margin like a dare. Approximately 84,853 American aircraft built in 1943, an industrial choir that drowns argument. Another figure, heavier. By war's end, roughly 4.78 million tons of Japanese merchant shipping destroyed, with late 43 the inflection that starves garrisons however bravely they fight. It seems unkind to put breakfast and tonnage on the same page, but that is where the truth lives. She shuffles a procurement sheet almost as a joke. Syrup, maple-flavoured, 10-pound tins. Destination, Seattle Port of Embarkation. Somewhere in Vermont, a woman signed the packing list. Somewhere in Chicago, a clerk stamped a bill of lading. Somewhere in the Aleutians, a sergeant warmed a can so it would pour at 40 degrees. The line that begins in a sugar house ends in a tent that smells of iodine and bacon fat. Hart does not romanticize. She circles a ravine on Attu where a prisoner mentioned a radio set. The note will move a patrol like a hidden hand. She overlays the sinkings with ration returns. Barley cut into rice, vitamins evaporating from men who cannot be resupplied except by miracle. She writes, almost to herself, if the ship goes down, the rifle never leaves the factory. If the tanker goes down, the rice never leaves the dock. She copies the date line carefully. May 30th, 1943. Attu. A tremor of ink connects her desk to a mess tent pitched at the edge of the map, where a stove sings and a private learns a new flavour. Hart has not been there, and likely never will, but she understands small hinges. Morale moves along them, rumour too. She pauses at the doorway, pins one last card linking a convoy sailed to one that will never arrive, then threads a second line from Chicago to Seattle to the Aleutians. Two kinds of supply. Only one endures. Snow squeaks under boots outside the sugar house, and the pans boil like a choir. Lillian Morse stands with her ledger in mittened hands, a pencil behind her ear and steam curling her hair. Vermont to Chicago is a map she carries in muscle. Load the tank, test the seam, check the bricks, trust the crew. The winter has thinned sugar allotments, so the plant switches to a maple-flavoured formula the quartermaster prefers for bulk issue. It tastes like home at scale, which is the point. She would have argued with the foreman last year. Now she bargains with him, the union steward, and a captain in a khaki coat over tin plate thickness and line speed. Output and safety, both, because democracy fights with compromises that hold. They chalk a fix on the floor, move a guard, swap a gasket, and the conveyor sings without taking fingers. Boxcars smell of iron and winter. Lillian rides one east to west, wedged between pyramids of 10-pound tins, reading lot numbers like milestones. In Chicago, the Quartermaster Depot is a city under a roof. Forklifts, whistles, cranes, men in denim and olive drab. Pallets disappear into a khaki sea marked SPOD, Seattle Port of Embarkation, like a promise. She signs the manifest and pockets a carbon. The clerk taps the destination. Edge of the world, he says, as if that were an address. She does the little things no table will hold. Warms a tin to test pour at 40 degrees, scribbles a note about label glue that fails in damp, mails a letter with a smear of sap that will make her cousin laugh on a destroyer. In the cafeteria, someone has pinned a newspaper clipping about Victory Gardens canning by the billions. The number feels like a rumour and like the truth. On the loading dock, a corporal shows her a stencil plate. She presses it into a test scrap and watches the letters bloom black through dew. The act feels ceremonial. She thinks of men in tents she will never see, of coffee poured while the wind flattens canvas, of a sergeant who will warm this very tin to make it flow. If kindness is expensive, she thinks, let it be expensive on purpose. The boxcar door slams and the cupola clanks. She feels the long body of the train gather and run. In the click and sway, she counts in 12s the way cooks count ladles. By the time she reaches the mezzanine again in Chicago, she can pick by ear which conveyors are out of true. She taps a guard with a wrench and hears the pitch change. And when the line purrs, she grins at the foreman like they have stolen a march. The depot below glows like a steel mill. She looks down at an ocean of khaki pyramids surging west and thinks, every ladle is a promise kept. Back to Attu by noon, the light a colour between tin and bone, the tent breathing like a lung. The choreography is steady now, 3 griddles, Ruiz skating the edges with a ladle, Hanlon reading the stove by sound, coffee thuds into mugs, condensation smokes away on hot steel. The line is mixed, Americans, prisoners, all the same grey where frost has bitten. The military police lieutenant repeats the policy in a tone that makes it ritual. Equivalent rations, medical aid before questions, dignity in processing. A medic nods without looking up as he checks a pulse, explaining to no one that hot liquids fight shock and sugar yanks a man's focus back from grey to colour. Humane treatment would typically stabilise vitals faster than any barked order, and stabilisation is the predicate to useful speech. Technicals live everywhere you glance. Sandbags bank the wind so the griddles hold a constant temper. Syrup warms on the back plate until it pours instead of lurching. Mess kits clatter in near-boiling washwater. Garans gleam on a rack like sleeping tools. A bar sprawls across a crate, its bipod like a spider. Spare K-ration boxes wait, but Hanlon means to serve the real thing as long as fuel holds. Nakamura watches as a corporal, without comment, tucks an extra strip of bacon onto a plate for a private whose hands will not stop shaking. The gesture is small and has the gravity of a treaty. Myths fray quickest at a table. Eyes down, he listens to the kitchen's language. Flip, hold, pour, the words of a well-oiled machine. This would have been a greasy spoon in Kansas. Here it is a statement as clear as a flag. The interpreter's notebook rides in his breast pocket like a metronome against his heart. He will later write that a single hot meal often did more for coherence than blankets alone. Men answer in complete sentences when they stop shivering. Clinical as a log entry, it reads like philosophy. In a lull, Hanlon watches the ridgepole flex against a gust and thinks about the journey of a single tin, tree to sap, to syrup, to rail, to ship, to beach, to stove, to plate, to steadied hands. Machines and oaths have both done their part to make this small mercy possible. A runner ducks in with news, a cache of rice in a ravine, mouldy, no ammunition, no canned goods, nothing else. Outside, the storm scours the island as if it were a ship's deck. Inside, the stove's voice has become the room's heartbeat. When the runner leaves with a mug he did not ask for, Hanlon marks tins expended, 2 pallets down, 1 to go, and says almost gently, "We keep feeding it." Everyone understands he is talking about more than the stove. Steam curls out of Nakamura's cup the way wood smoke used to curl from his family's bathhouse in Hokkaido, and the scent of coffee feels like a trick his mind is playing. He sets the cup down so carefully it does not clink. The interpreter, Sergeant Kim, waits with a schoolmaster's patience and slides the form closer, boxes for unit and weapon printed as if the paper had known him before he was born. Nakamura breathes, answers, and watches the pencil move. His thoughts keep doubling back to rations. The allotments had thinned, barley padding rice until his stomach argued with his pride. Cargoes that should have come never did, convoys that should have appeared were rumours and then legends. He would have pretended longer if not for this breakfast. Mercy from an enemy does an arithmetic the manuals never warned him about. He thinks in hardware as well as hunger. The Type 99 Arisaka's bolt had become a metronome in his hands, 5 rounds like 5 steps in a song. The Type 92 heavy machine gun ate 30-round strips while barrels blued and then went the wrong colour. Across the tent, the M1 Garand rides easy against an MP's shoulder, a rate of fire that looks like a luxury the way hot syrup looks like a luxury. He turns the syrup can and reads English letters like weather signs. Kim does not hurry. He asks about a radio rumoured in a ravine. Nakamura nods once and qualifies, and a runner traces the note the way water finds a seam. He mentions a rice dump gone to mildew. Kim's pencil pauses because the word itself is proof of something larger. A good teacher knows a single detail can open a chapter. Somewhere far from this tent, Americans built about 84,853 aircraft in 1943, thunder made of rivets and schedules. Elsewhere, submariners had already destroyed millions of tons of shipping so that rice became rumour on islands that used to trust the sea. The numbers are not in this room, but their weather is. The medic checks his pulse and tells him with schoolmaster tidiness to finish the bacon. Nakamura adds a line because it feels correct to be precise. Food, coffee, warmth. He has never used the word humane in this context, and writing it steadies him. Outside, the wind soars at guy lines. Inside, the stove answers in a steady voice. Kim caps his pen and thanks him in clean Japanese, then asks, as if an afterthought, about a call sign he has heard. Nakamura answers out of habit more than intention. The pencil moves again. A patrol moves because of the pencil. Before dusk, a radio will change owners. After, the wind will still soar, and the stove will still say the same quiet thing. We can afford to be this kind. The tent smells of iodine, wool, and bacon fat cooling on steel. A domestic scent dragged into a war nobody planned to be polite about. Sergeant Kim sits cross-legged on a crate with his notebook open, the paper already damp at the edges from the sea breath that slides under the flap. He does not prod. He asks as if he were inviting a student to finish a lesson begun before the bell. Nakamura sips coffee in small, careful swallows, the cup steady now that heat has found his fingers. The questions would have been the same without breakfast. The answers likely would not. Kim begins with the neutral: name, rank, unit. Boxes fill in neat script: 303rd Independent Infantry Battalion, Type 99 rifle issued, ammunition low before dawn. He draws a small map with the pencil side, the way a schoolchild shades a coastline. Where was the radio? In a cut near the stream. Where did the last convoy reach? No convoy, only rumour. The words are plain but heavy, like wet wool. Doc Alvarez listens with a medic's unblinking kindness, charting core temp, pulse, and the way language returns when sugar does. Humane treatment, he would have written, typically stabilizes a man faster than any threat. It is not a strategy of softness. It is the shortest line to clarity. Outside, Hanlon's range coughs, accepts a new can, and resumes its even throat-deep roar. Inside, the pencil moves. The patrol that goes after the radio moves lightly, warned about the cut, warned about the seep at the edge that makes boots skate. They find the set under a tarp that knew rain too well, a cereal plate glinting like a small moon. Back in the tent, Kim notes the call sign and the battery condition, details too granular to be invented by a man who has just learned coffee. His voice is respectful, his questions tight as a drum. None of this looks like war to anyone who draws it in oil on a museum wall. Yet every ladle of syrup carries consequence. A steadied hand signs a name places a company places a sector anchors a map. Across the island, a squad noses toward a mouldy rice cache Nakamura mentioned without drama. They find sacks cut by damp and a smear of rats. The supply lines are not simply thin, they have been gnawed through. Evening gives the wind a colder edge. Kim caps his pen and bows a little as he thanks Nakamura. The private bows deeper because habit is stronger than sleep. Outside, Hanlon counts tins against hours of flame and hears in the arithmetic a discipline as severe as any order of battle. The patrol's runner shoulders through the flap with the radio hugged like a child, and the stove answers the news with the same indifferent song. Keep feeding it. A crane lifts a pallet of syrup as if it were ammunition, the sling biting into wood, the hoist whining like a question that wants to be answered now. The Seattle port of embarkation runs the choreography at a tempo learned from mistakes, cargo nets, hand signals, chalked tallies, boots dodging the fatal triangles where tension meets gravity. Lillian Morse watches from a catwalk, only for a day before the return train, long enough to see her tins become cargo plan entries on a Liberty ship bound for weather and war. Below, dockers work with the grace of men who know where all the pinch points live. A petty officer with a clipboard calls lot codes. A stevedore echoes them back like a liturgy. The hull swallows syrup, stoves, soap, rope, flour, tarps, and the small luxuries that make men think civilization hasn't fled the field entirely. Somewhere in the manifest, a line reads like a joke with an iron punchline. Maple-flavoured syrup, 10-pound tins, pour warm at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The voyage would have been a catalogue of seas, grey slopes that make decks into hills, spray blown sidewise as if God were sweeping. The Liberty ship's master trims ballast to keep GM positive in the rack. Lashings thunk and settle. The cook curses the stove like it were a mutinous sailor. A harbour pilot will climb down a ladder slick as eel skin and trust a timing that cannot be written, only practised. On the far edge, a beach party in sleet does the reverse ballet to a drumbeat set by surf. Seabees throw a pad together with graders and cuss words. A beachmaster in a helmet streaked with tape points with both arms to solve the puzzle of tide versus appetite. The crates hit stones, then shoulders, then sleds, then arms numbed to the elbow. The tins roll to a tent with a stove that has already learned the wind's grammar. You could film it as montage, but the mind prefers a single tin. The one Lillian tested under a steam hood back home. The one a stevedore stacked with a shout. The one a seaman lashed to a pallet at 4 a.m. The one a private in sleet pried loose with a crowbar. It arrives dented, perfect, ready to pour. Hanlon rests it on warm steel and listens for the pitch that tells him the sweetness has gone from sluggish to ribbon. Far inland on Attu, the line forms again. Men who have not slept in a bed in weeks hold tin plates like chalices. Ruiz taps the can and nods. The syrup threads amber over a cake that steams like breath. Somewhere on the strand, a beachmaster blows his whistle and rehearses tomorrow in his head. The ship's wake has already folded back into the sea, but the warmth riding it has come ashore to stay. By autumn 1943, the chalkboard in Lieutenant Evelyn Hart's briefing room looks like a storm map someone decided to believe. She pins a red card marked Attu, May 30th, next to a line that falls like a blade, Japanese merchant tonnage trending down through late 42 and curving steeply across 43. Slides stack like dealt cards, convoy losses, ration shortfalls, reports of barley cut into rice until even euphemism cannot feed a regiment. She clears her throat for officers who still prefer noise to numbers and gives them the victory they earned in mathematics. She marks the inflection months and reads calmly what the numbers have already said. Past this point, no tactical brilliance can offset the fact that calories and cartridges cannot swim. Submarines that misbehaved at the start now run true. Captains adjust depth settings that used to embarrass them. Hart lays one card beside another. Sinkings here. Reports of garrison dizziness and night blindness there. The graph is not cruel. It is physics. Then the impossible-sounding truth she always saves to burn the fog away. Roughly 84,853 American aircraft built in 1943, a national choir of aluminum and rivets that could drown debate, and by war's end about 4.78 million tons of Japanese merchant shipping destroyed. She does not brag. She clicks the projector and lets the blank pause say that this is what free people did while keeping factories unionized, courts open, elections scheduled. She folds Pancakes into it without apology. Gentlemen, you know Attu's mess line. Same chow, same measure. A flicker of smiles. That policy isn't charity. It is capacity, expressed as law. The officers shift as if they have been seen doing something intimate. Eating while the enemy starved because the pipeline held, then handing the enemy a plate because it still held. A Marine colonel asks the question he always asks, where does this go next? Hart points to the Central Pacific, to Tarawa and beyond, notes prisoner counts so small they look like misprints and explains why, ideology, training, and the late arrival of the rumour that capture would not be hell. That rumour travels now, she adds quietly. When the lights come up, the colonel looks back at the curve as if it were a photograph of a son grown taller while he was gone. Hart draws a last thin line in chalk, from factory to ship to mess line, and caps the stick with a clap that leaves dust on her palms. Outcome is statistics, she says. Experience is breakfast. No one laughs this time. They nod like men who have eaten and understood the bill. The gale has eased to a steady soughing, and the tent sits easier on its pegs. Hanlon finally has time to make a table out of 2 ammo crates and a plank, to lay a ledger open under a pencil he chews without noticing. He writes the inventory as if it were a prayer. Tins expended, 2 pallets and 8. Flour sacks drawn, 11. Fuel cans drained, 5, with 1 dented and weeping. Report for exchange. Stove hours, continuous, minus relight pauses. He notes the small corrections they learned by wind, the sandbag stack, the extra minute on the flip, the syrup warmed until it cared to flow. Doc Alvarez sits beside him with his own ledger, fingers almost clean for the first time in days. He logs core temps, pulse recovery times, how often coffee brought a man back from the edge faster than blankets. Humane treatment would have, humane treatment did. He adds the ordinary miracles medics memorize, fingers thawed without blackening, shivers bled off into quilts, coherence returning with heat and calories. There is no poetry in his columns, only the quiet grammar of survival. Sergeant Kim brings in interrogation summaries in a folder that has become soft at the corners. He has mapped the ravine where the radio lay, traced the path to a rice cache that turned out to be a midden of mould, noted the detail that men who had eaten spoke in paragraphs instead of fragments. The Provost Marshal Captain signs the top sheet under a pasted Geneva extract, equivalent rations, dignity in processing, as if countersigning the policy that made the tent feel now and then like a rule of law pitched in canvas. Hanlon adds a margin note a younger cook will bless if he ever reads it. Warm syrup on back plate, pause at 40, morale effect out of proportion to weight. He knows he is writing for a stranger. Wars are relays, and a good handoff can be as decisive as a sprint. He tucks a corner of a syrup label into a letter for home, presses it flat with a thumbnail, and writes around it so the page keeps the smell. Outside, the ridgeline looks less like a fist and more like a shoulder. Men stack crates and police brass, the tidying after violence that makes veterans strangely tender. The stove is quiet for the first time, and the silence feels loud. Hanlon lays a hand on the range as if checking a fever that has broken. "We'll light you again," he says softly, to metal, or to policy, or to the idea that fed prisoners while the guns were still warm. The wind slides a palm across the canvas and moves on. A blackboard fills with figures that look at first like a bookkeeper's dream and then like a continent choosing a future. Someone chalks aircraft production, approximately 84,853 in 1943, then draws arrows to convoy diagrams, then writes Victory Gardens, billions of jars, and underlines the word jars 3 times because it feels too humble for its weight. The numbers stand next to each other like rifles in a rack and then begin to talk. The chalk walks through differences. Men at the front simply lived. Dead weight versus gross register tonnage, how a torpedo that runs at the proper depth turns shipping lanes into famine, why a factory that keeps a union steward and a foreman talking can spin a belt 1 notch faster without throwing sparks into cotton waste. A slide shows a Mk-14 torpedo report with the shameful word premature crossed out in a later patrol, the fix like a hinge that swings an ocean. Another shows an M1937 field range drawing thousands of BTUs and a note on fuel consumption curves, because the right heat at the right moment can be the difference between chaos and a mess line that feels like law. One card strings a single B-17 from wing rivet to convoy cover to a ship that does not sink, and therefore to a crate of syrup that does not become flotsam. Another stacks ration point tables beside payroll sheets and shows how a woman in Vermont bought sugar with paperwork so a man in a tent could taste civilization between shell bursts. The math is not sentimental, it is deliberately human. A colonel raises the question that brings silence: what turns all this quantity into character? The answer is embarrassingly simple: transparent rules, elected people writing budgets, courts that stay open, strikes negotiated, not broken. A sergeant who believes a page in a convention signed between wars is still binding in one. Capacity without conscience becomes threat. Conscience without capacity becomes prayer. The Republic chose both. In a corner sits an empty syrup tin, label unscarred. Someone has stenciled its lot number on the blackboard as if it were a serial of a weapon. No one laughs. The tin is a weapon. If war is the act of bending another's will, then the kindness inside law bent more than a few, and did it faster than shouts. The board gets erased and filled again. Arrows become a habit. Men who once measured success in yards now nod at curves that end wars by degrees. When the lights come up, hands that can strip a garand by feel clap chalk dust from palms, and across knuckles and calluses the dust looks like the Aleutian fog it once became, then like steam off a plate. The camera widens and the calendar flips. New Britain, August 1944. Signal Corps lenses catch Japanese prisoners taking their first GI food, steam and caution rising together. The captions will later read with the blunt tenderness of bureaucracy: Japanese POWs get first GI food after capture. Elsewhere, on an Okinawan slope, an interpreter pours coffee for a conscript who has forgotten how to hold a cup. The act is the same in every latitude. Law with a ladle. Rumour would have moved slower than ships in 1943. By 1944 and into 1945, it travels with the wind and with men who have seen both kinds of enemy. Surrender remains rare against an ideology that marries shame to death, but where stories of humane treatment filter through, hesitation lengthens. Some hands lift a fraction sooner. Some eyes stop hunting for a grenade that isn't there. Intelligence officers will file it under morale with a shrug. A cook might call it breakfast, doing reconnaissance. The impossible statistic belongs here because endings need scale. By war's end, roughly 4.78 million tons of Japanese merchant shipping had been destroyed. In 1943 alone, approximately 84,853 American aircraft were built. A single American plant, the Willow Run bomber line, would reach a B-24 roughly every hour at its peak the following year. Numbers that look like boasting are, in this light, architecture for mercy. You cannot feed enemies if you cannot feed yourself in motion. Attu dwindles into a grey-green memory where wind found every seam. Nakamura will go home and teach again, write on a slate, and pour real maple syrup, post-war, peacetime, purchased, over Sunday cakes, because his son saw it in a shop window and asked. He will tell the story without decoration, an MP with a modern rifle who did not sneer, a cook who warmed syrup so it would pour, a medic who said finish the bacon. He will underline humane once, precisely. Hanlon will demobilize with the stove's voice still lodged in his ears, and the knowledge that he fought a war with fire and flour, and a law he could recite in his sleep. Lillian will walk out of a plant that learned how to run without eating its people, then vote on a Tuesday because the habit feels like keeping a promise. Hart will pin her last shipping graph and begin a new one labelled Rebuild, the curve going the other way, because victors who can forgive are wealthier than victors who cannot. In a museum someday, a child will stand before a dented 10-pound syrup tin and wonder why the glass case feels holy. The placard will be dull, the way truth often is. Somewhere in its lines will be the sentence that matters. Kindness was expensive. We could afford it. Steam rises from a memory like fog, and the taste that stunned an enemy private becomes the flavour of peace.